December 1943. Across the Atlantic, thousands of German prisoners captured in North Africa and Europe arrived in the United States aboard Liberty ships. For many, it was their first glimpse of the land their leaders had described as weak, decadent, and divided. From the docks of Norfolk, Virginia, to the camps of Texas, Oklahoma, and the Midwest, the journey shocked them. They expected cages, cruelty, perhaps starvation. Instead, they were marched into compounds that looked more like military bases than prisons. Inside the wire stood neat rows of wooden barracks, kitchens, libraries, even soccer fields. Guards explained rules in fluent German and reminded them that the Geneva Convention would be followed. To men hardened by desert warfare, this felt impossible. One diary later discovered read, "We braced for beatings. Instead, they gave us blankets, soap, and food. I thought I was dreaming. Could this be America?" Daily life soon settled into routine. Roll calls at dawn, work details assigned to farms and factories, afternoons filled with chores, evenings with soccer or books provided by the YMCA. The guards were strict but not cruel. Discipline was enforced, but prisoners were treated with dignity. Compared to the freezing winters and bombed cities of Germany, captivity in America felt strangely humane. Yet the war was never far. News trickled in through censored letters, Red Cross bulletins, and whispers from guards. By late 1943, prisoners knew the Reich was in retreat, though few dared admit it aloud. Still, as winter settled across the camps, another thought stirred among the men. December was approaching. Christmas, the most sacred holiday of their homeland. Would they be allowed to mark it here, in the land of their enemies? At first, the idea seemed absurd. Surely guards would forbid such celebrations. Surely Americans would see no reason to honor the traditions of men who had fought under Hitler's flag. But in the weeks that followed, strange things began to appear. Pine branches carried in from nearby woods, paper stars folded from newspapers, rumors of carols permitted in the barracks. The prisoners began to whisper, perhaps they would celebrate Christmas after all, and not in secret, but with the knowledge, even the cooperation, of their captors. One soldier scribbled in a notebook, "If the Americans allow us to honor Christmas, then they are not the monsters we were told. Then perhaps everything we believed is a lie." The stage was set for one of the most extraordinary moments of their captivity, a holiday unlike any they had ever known, celebrated not in freedom, but in the unlikeliest of prisons. The story of Christmas behind barbed wire was about to begin. Continue. The first days of December brought a change in the air. Cold winds swept across the camps, and with them, memories of home. For the prisoners, Christmas was not just a holiday, it was a lifeline to the world they had lost. Without official decorations, they improvised. Prisoners cut pine branches from nearby woods, smuggling them past guards who turned a blind eye, barracks filled with the sharp scent of evergreen. Paper stars were folded from old newspapers. Cardboard scraps were painted with leftover ink, transforming into ornaments. Empty cans became candle holders. Creativity replaced what war had taken. One diary entry recorded, "We made trees from branches and stars from paper." For a moment, we were boys again, preparing for Christmas in our villages. The wire around us disappeared. The YMCA provided hymn books in German. Guards, some of them sons of immigrants from Europe, quietly allowed carols to echo through the camp. At night, voices rose in harmony, soft, mournful, but filled with faith. Meals were saved in secret. Prisoners set aside bits of bread, fruit, and sugar from rations. These small treasures were hoarded for the holiday, to create feasts where none should exist. Rumors spread that American farmers who relied on POW labor planned to send food baskets. Chickens, pies, even jars of jam might arrive. The men whispered, hardly believing it possible. Letters home, heavily censored, carried vague lines. "We prepare for a special day." Families in Germany could never know the truth that their sons would celebrate Christmas not in silence, but in the land of their captors. Guards noticed the prisoners' energy. One report described the men as restless but oddly cheerful, decorating barracks with whatever scraps they could find. Some American officers allowed small radios to play carols on Christmas Eve. For many Germans, it was their first time hearing familiar hymns sung in English. Strange, yet comforting. By mid-December, the camps no longer felt like prisons. They felt like villages waiting for Christmas morning. The air was filled not with despair, but with anticipation. A prisoner wrote, "It is madness. We are prisoners, yet we prepare for Christmas as if we are free. Perhaps the Americans understand more about us than we thought. The stage was set. The trees were decorated, the carols practiced, and the food saved. But the true shock had yet to come. For soon, Christmas would arrive, and with it, gestures of kindness from their captors that the prisoners would never forget." Yes, the evening of December 24th, 1944, settled cold and clear across the American heartland. Inside the wire, the prisoners of war gathered in barracks dimly lit by makeshift candles. The air carried the sharp scent of pine branches, decorated with paper stars and ornaments cut from tin cans. Every table was swept clean, every bunk straightened. The camp, for one night, felt like home. At first, silence filled the barracks. Then a single voice began to sing, "Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht." One by one, others joined. Soon the hymn rose strong and clear, echoing across the camp. American guards, standing at their posts, listened quietly. Some, children of German immigrants themselves, mouthed the words they had once heard in their own churches. A diary from that night read, "We sang as though the wire did not exist." The guards did not stop us. For a moment we were men, not prisoners. When the carols ended, the men shared what little they had saved. Bread broken carefully, fruit passed hand to hand, sugar dissolved into weak coffee. It was not abundance, but it was Christmas. Some camps allowed special meals from Red Cross parcels, canned meat, butter, chocolate. A feast compared to what families in Germany now endured in the ruins of bombed cities. Guards and prisoners exchanged quiet nods. A few American officers even entered the barracks, offering greetings. "Merry Christmas," spoken in English, was answered with "Frohe Weihnachten." One guard later admitted in his journal, "It felt wrong and yet right to wish them well. They are our enemies, but tonight they are simply young men far from home." In some camps, Protestant and Catholic services were held. Chaplains led prayers in German, speaking of peace on earth and goodwill toward men. The irony was not lost on the prisoners, but the message gave comfort. Children from nearby towns pressed small gifts through the wire-knitted scarves, marbles, carved toys. In return, prisoners offered hand-carved wooden figures, sketches, or simple greetings. As midnight approached, the camps grew still. The men lay in their bunks, clutching trinkets, whispering prayers, humming carols. For the first time in captivity, many wept openly. Christmas Eve had become something none of them expected. A night of dignity, kindness, and faith shared with their captors. And when Christmas morning dawned, the greatest surprise awaited them: gestures from American families that would change their view of the enemy forever. Yes, the sun rose on December the 25th, 1944. Frost clung to the barbed wire, glittering like glass. The prisoners awoke expecting another ordinary roll call, another ration of bread and coffee. But this morning was different. At the gates, baskets and parcels waited. Farmers who had employed POW labor sent food from their own homes, roast chickens, jars of jam, fruitcakes, even fresh milk. The guards carried the baskets inside, setting them down in the mess hall. The prisoners stared in disbelief. These were not rations. These were Christmas gifts. One soldier wrote in his diary, "We were given fruit and meat, pies and cakes. I thought of my family in Germany, hungry and cold. I ate with guilt, but also with gratitude." Some American families had knitted scarves and gloves, passing them through the wire. Others sent hymnals, candles, or small radios to play Christmas music. For men far from home, these simple things were priceless. A guard remembered, "The farmers gave as if the Germans were neighbors, not enemies." I saw grown men cry into their food inside the barracks. Prisoners set the tables carefully. They shared every bite equally, refusing to let anyone go without. For a few hours, hunger and loneliness seemed to vanish. The carols returned, sung louder than the night before. This time, some Americans joined. Silent Night carried in 2 languages, flowing across the camp like a prayer for peace. One prisoner recalled, "We sang in German, they sang in English, and it was the same song. The wire between us meant nothing." Children again appeared at the fences, pressing apples, candy, or small gifts into prisoners' hands. The Germans responded with carved wooden toys, drawings, or handmade jewelry crafted from scraps. Even the guards softened. Some shook hands with the men they had once watched with suspicion. A few dared to say, "Merry Christmas," and meant it. The shock was not in the food or the gifts. It was in the realization that the enemy had chosen kindness over cruelty. That morning, the prisoners of Hitler discovered something more powerful than propaganda, the humanity of their captors. And from that discovery came a question none dared answer aloud. If the Americans could show mercy, what did that mean for everything the Reich had told them? Yes. The days that followed Christmas left a mark on the camps. The memories of shared food, songs, and kindness lingered long after the candles had burned out and the gifts had been eaten. For the first time, many prisoners looked at their guards and the farmers differently. They were no longer faceless captors. They were men, families, neighbors, people capable of generosity in the midst of war. A German soldier wrote in his diary, "I saw an American guard smile at us as we sang carols. Not mockery, not cruelty, only kindness. I will never forget that smile. Conversations grew bolder. Prisoners who once spoke little now exchanged words with guards, practicing English. Farmers asked about families in Germany. Some even compared farming methods, discovering that despite the war, the soil connected them all. Children became bridges between the 2 worlds. They played near the fences, laughing as prisoners taught them German words or whittled toys from scraps of wood. Laughter replaced silence. The bonds were fragile, forbidden by regulation, but undeniable. Each shared word and each small gesture carried more power than propaganda. A guard confessed in his journal, "I watch them differently now. They are not monsters. They are boys, no different from the ones we sent overseas." For the prisoners, the kindness cut deeply into the stories they had been told. They had been taught that America was decadent, soulless, collapsing. Yet here they saw respect, faith, and families who treated them with dignity. Some prisoners began to question not only the Reich's propaganda, but also their own loyalties. If the enemy was so human, then what had they been fighting for? Others simply cherished the moments as rare gifts. One wrote, "Christmas gave us something no army could take hope. Even in captivity, We felt human again. The bonds formed over that holiday were not erased when the decorations came down. They lingered in smiles, in quiet greetings, in the shared rhythm of work and rest. And though the barbed wire still stood, something invisible had crossed it, a fragile bridge of trust, built in the unlikeliest of places. But bonds built in war are never without risk. Soon, letters, diaries, and whispers would reveal truths too dangerous to share openly. And the silence of censorship would once again remind the prisoners that, despite the kindness, they were still captives in a land not their own. Yes, after Christmas, the prisoners longed to share what they had experienced with their families in Germany. They wanted to write of the food, the gifts, the kindness. But every letter was censored, every word inspected. They quickly learned to write cautiously. I am healthy. We work daily. The guards are fair, but what they truly wanted to say, that they had celebrated Christmas with their captors, was too dangerous to risk. One prisoner, Wilhelm Krauss, scribbled in his diary, I wanted to tell my mother I sang Silent Night with Americans, but if I wrote it, the letter would never reach her. Another, Otto Meissner, noted, they would call me a liar if I wrote the truth. Or worse, a traitor. So I wrote nothing. My silence is safer. The censors allowed only bland details. Families back in Germany, enduring hunger and bombings, received sterile lines that revealed nothing of the humanity their sons had found in captivity. But the diaries, hidden under mattresses, buried in pockets, told another story. They recorded Christmas dinners, laughter with children, the shock of receiving gifts from supposed enemies. A guard confirmed the prisoner's unease in his own log. They ask if Berlin reads their letters. They seem afraid to praise us even when they want to. Some prisoners develop codes. The weather is warm, meant kindness from the guards. The nights are quiet, meant safety. The days are long, meant farm work. But the truth of Christmas could not be coded. So the memory remained locked inside the wire, carried only in diaries and whispered between bunks at night. A prisoner later recalled, the greatest gift of that Christmas was hope. But hope could not be mailed home. It lived only in our hearts. The silence was painful. They longed for their families to know the truth, that the enemy had shown them dignity. But silence was the only safe choice, and yet that silence carried a weight. For in what could not be spoken lay the seeds of transformation. The prisoners had seen the enemy's humanity, and though they could not share it, they could never forget it. Soon, that humanity would be tested in bonds even more fragile, even more forbidden connections that reached beyond friendship and into the realm of love. Yes, the Christmas of 1944 did more than warm the barracks. It opened doors to connections that went beyond friendship. In some cases, bonds grew that neither guards nor farmers had imagined possible. Farmers' daughters, who had seen the Germans working in their fields, sometimes exchanged glances across cotton rows. A smile over a jug of water, a shy laugh at broken English. Such gestures were dangerous. Rules strictly forbade any intimacy between civilians and prisoners. Discovery could mean punishment, solitary confinement, or transfer to harsher camps. And yet, after the kindness of Christmas, barriers seemed weaker. A farmer's daughter might leave extra food on a plate. A prisoner might carve a small wooden toy and pass it through a fence. One diary recorded, she slipped me an apple as she passed. Our hands touched for an instant. I carried that warmth all day. Rumors spread of secret dances in barns, where music played and Germans stood at the edges, tapping their boots, their eyes fixed on American girls who should have been untouchable. A German soldier later wrote, "There was music, there was laughter, and for a moment the war was forgotten. But when the song ended, we remembered who we were." Guards noticed. Reports mentioned too much familiarity between local women and prisoners. Commanders issued warnings, but affection is not easily ordered away. One American farmer, years later, admitted, "I knew my daughter liked one of them. I forbade it, but I also understood. They were boys, not monsters. How could she not see that?" For the Germans, these bonds shattered propaganda more powerfully than food or gifts ever could. If even the daughters of their enemies could show them kindness, then what had they truly been fighting for? Most of these bonds remain quiet, fleeting, and unspoken, carved initials, hidden notes, or brief touches across fences. Yet they carried a power that endured long after the war. A note discovered decades later contained only 6 words: "I love you. I cannot stay." Christmas had planted the seed, but it was the human heart that carried it further into places no guard tower or barbed wire could truly confine. And soon, another Christmas would come, one that would again remind the prisoners that even behind fences, they had not been forgotten. Yes, by December 1945, the war was over. Germany lay in ruins, cities burned, families scattered, hunger spread across the homeland. But in America, the prisoners remained waiting for ships to carry them back across the Atlantic. They were no longer soldiers of the Reich. They were men in limbo, caught between captivity and freedom, between the world they had left and the shattered world awaiting them. As Christmas approached again, many wondered, would last year's kindness return? Or had the end of the war erased the sympathy of their captors? The answer came slowly in the form of familiar gestures. Farmers once again sent baskets of food bread, pies, chickens, fruit. Guards allowed decorations, even encouraged carols. The spirit of the previous year was not forgotten. One German prisoner wrote, "I feared last Christmas was a miracle never to be repeated." But again the farmers gave, the guards smiled, and we sang. The miracle returned. This time, the carols carried a new meaning. Silent Night echoed through the camp not only as a prayer for peace, but as a celebration that peace had finally come. Guards, less burdened now by wartime suspicion, joined openly in the songs. Some even entered the barracks to shake hands, offering warm greetings without hesitation. Children returned to the fences with small gifts. One girl pressed a Bible through the wire, its verses marked with careful notes. The prisoner who received it carried it home after his release, treasuring it for the rest of his life. Meals were shared again. Prisoners feasted on foods they knew their families in Germany could only dream of. For many, it was a bittersweet joy, savoring abundance while thinking of loved ones surviving on scraps. A prisoner admitted in his diary, "I tasted chocolate tonight. My sister has not seen such food in years. I ate it with guilt, but I could not refuse the kindness." The second Christmas proved the first had not been an accident. It showed that compassion was not a fleeting gesture, but a quiet tradition that could survive even after war had ended. By the close of 1945, many prisoners realized they would soon be repatriated. Christmas that year became a farewell of sorts, a last memory of kindness before returning to the ruins of home. One wrote simply, "We go back to Germany, but part of us will never leave this place. Christmas here has changed us forever." 2 Christmases in captivity. 2 moments when the barbed wire dissolved and enemies remembered they were human. The prisoners would carry those memories home, tucked inside them like the diaries they dared not show. Yes, by the spring of 1946, the long wait was over. Orders arrived. The prisoners would be sent back to Germany. Trucks lined up once again, but this time not for farms or fields. They would carry the men to trains, then ships bound for Europe. The news was met with mixed emotions. Some cheered, desperate to see their families after years apart. Others were quiet, dreading the ruins they would find at home. America had been strange, but it had been safe. Farmers and townsfolk gathered near the camps to say goodbye. For 2 years, they had worked side by side with the Germans, shared food, exchanged gifts, even celebrated Christmas together. Now it was time to part. Some families pressed photographs or Bibles into prisoners' hands. Others passed notes, wishing safe travels. A few even wept openly, surprising the guards as much as the prisoners. One farmer's daughter later remembered, "He shook my hand through the wire. We said nothing, only looked at each other. Then he was gone. I never saw him again. For the prisoners, leaving was bittersweet. They longed for home, but they also left behind something they had never expected: respect for their captors, and friendships they could never explain back in Germany. A diary captured the moment. I leave America with strange feelings. I came as an enemy. I leave as a man who has seen kindness from those I was told to hate. The trains carried them eastward, the land rolling by one last time. The orchards, the fields, the small towns these sites, once foreign, now lived in their memories like a second home. At the ports, the ships waited. Liberty vessels that had once brought them to captivity would now carry them toward freedom and into the ruins of their homeland. Guards shook hands, some offering final words of encouragement. "Good luck," they said. For the first time, the prisoners believed the words were genuine. As the ships pulled away, many stood at the rails watching the American coast disappear into the horizon. They carried with them more than belongings. They carried Christmas memories, carved toys, notes, and above all, gratitude. For in captivity they had discovered something unexpected: that mercy could survive war, and that compassion could outlive hatred. Their journey home was uncertain, their futures unclear. But the Christmases they had spent behind barbed wire in America would remain with them forever. And soon, those memories would find their way into diaries, letters, and stories passed down to children, testimonies of a strange, quiet peace found in the heart of war. Yes, the war was over. The camps were empty. But the memory of those Christmases in captivity lingered unquiet, unrecorded in history books, but carried in the hearts of those who lived them. In Germany, returning prisoners told their families carefully edited stories. They spoke of hard work, of discipline, of the long journey home. But in whispers, in diaries, in late-night conversations, they spoke of something more. They told of Christmas trees made from pine branches, of hymns sung in 2 languages across barbed wire, of farmers who brought food, and children who pressed gifts through fences. One veteran later recalled, "When I tell my grandchildren of the war, I do not tell them of battles. I tell them of Christmas in America, when the enemy fed me." American families, too, remembered. For them, the Germans were no longer nameless enemies. They were workers, neighbors, young men who had shared their tables and their songs. Decades later, some of these bonds endured. Letters crossed the Atlantic. Former prisoners returned to the farms they had once labored in, shaking the hands of old men who had once been their guards or employers. Historians often overlook these moments. They prefer battles, generals, and strategies. Yet in the quiet corners of a war, something just as powerful happened. Humanity refused to die. A farmer's son, interviewed in old age, summed it up simply: I remember those Germans at Christmas. They were supposed to be enemies. But all I saw were men, like us, for the prisoners. Those memories became part of their lives forever. They carried them into marriages, into families, into the rebuilding of their shattered homeland. And for America, it became a hidden legacy of the war that, even in the darkest times, compassion could flourish behind barbed wire. The Christmases of 1944 and 1945 did not change the course of the war, but they changed men. They showed that kindness could bridge even the deepest divides of hatred. The story of German POWs who celebrated Christmas with their captors is not one of weapons or victories. It is a story of candles, carols, bread, and mercy. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of all, that in the midst of a world at war, peace found a home, if only for a moment, in the hearts of enemies. A quiet legacy. A Christmas never forgotten.